Good morning, good morning. Welcome to the weekend stream. A couple of guests, Boffin and Karu. Say hello.
Hello.
Greetings.
Okay, first things off the rank. Last week at the end, I forgot to read out Leonardo DiCaprio's message, his super chat, which was, I felt loneliness for the first year or so after divorce. Then I started dating and gained an appreciation for being alone. A good life can be solitary. Yes, I agree. I've gone through similar moments, and I think naturally most people do need that space in between one thing and another. You know, you need the break, you need the time to regroup, you need the holiday. So being alone in between sort of, something bad and going towards something else is fairly essential. Some people do well with it permanently, but for the majority of us, it's a it's a harbor in between one place and another. But yes, certainly, I think after a divorce or any kind of huge trauma, cutting yourself loose from it feels like the answer, but really it is just you without it in your life now, which is certainly a good thing. And it feels good, so good that you don't feel like you need anything else, and you may not. But yeah, that's also, this is one of these things that you need to really, really self-assess. You can move on from bad things. You grow. You let go of baggage. You minimize your life. You clear the decks, and you only start to put back what works. And you move into a different chapter of life. Things like that, right? But I think a lot of people don't honestly reflect and see that, yes, I feel good because I don't have the horrors of yesterday with me anymore. I'm finally past that. The divorce came through. I'm no longer at that job. I quit. Whatever it might be. And it feels awesome. Holidays feel great. Not having a horror movie in your life feels great, but also not to confuse the lack of something with, the life you want to live now, if that makes sense. So anyway, that was a good comment. I apologize. I didn't read the super chat last week, Leonardo, but what I've discovered, I don't know if YouTube have just put this in during streams, but now I'm able to click on a tab that only looks at super chats. So I shouldn't miss a single super chat. If any of you guys want to super chat a comment or a question that you would really like me to read live, you can do it. And hopefully I will see it, but I should. Anyway, the topic of today is, let me see. How can you tell the difference between infatuation and love? So by now, a lot of the ultra macho guys would have switched off because I said the L word, and it's not really something that men discuss. We're all cowboys. We don't utter those words. But for me, it's kind of being real about why the hell do you want a long-term relationship? Because for me, love is very personal, and love lives with the word trust. And I associate that thing with the really important things in my life, the important people in my life. So I love the things I love doing, my hobbies, the people in my life, things like that. And there's a trust about them. There's a me being myself in them, and them interacting with me, or the thing interacting with me. So I would first pose it to you guys. What do you see as the difference between infatuation and love? Boffin, Karu?
I think infatuation is the easy one. I think we've all experienced infatuation, especially when we're young. when we first find a member of the opposite sex attractive. I think everyone has experienced infatuation, and I'm not sure too many people are confused about what that means once they've kind of gone through a few relationships in their life. Maybe when you're young, it's difficult to understand the difference between infatuation and love. But I think just a few relationships and a few maybe bad experiences or less than ideal experiences kind of gets you thinking about infatuation versus love. I think the much more difficult question is, what is love?
Hmm.
Baby, don't hurt me.
No more. I'm surprised you remember that one, Karu. I thought you were a bit too young for that.
Come on, man. Everybody knows the meme.
Yeah, I suppose that's the difference between the meme and actually the thing that the meme is derived from. I lived through the thing that the meme was derived from.
Yeah, but I think Boffin hit the nail on the head. I haven't really experienced infatuation except when I was very young. Since then, I haven't had the opportunity, or I was lucky enough to not go through that again. And I think the easy answer is that love is the one that lasts. Infatuation kind of tends to dissipate pretty fast.
I've always had a bit of an issue with the lack of control around the word love, and whether it's naive or not, I've spent my videos and time in these kind of discussions trying to gain some sort of control or skill or process or, you know, ethic around how to love, not it being a complete fluke and walking on eggshells and hoping it stays alive, rather than best practices by which it can maintain, like a friendship. You know, there's basic rules like communication, acknowledging that two people aren't going to be a mirror to each other, yet compatible, and being able to communicate their differences in order to keep it going, things like that. So the ephemeral nature of love is something I never really, you talk to death about it. It's important. You know what? When I was thinking about today's stream title, one word kept popping up in love compared to infatuation. Infatuation, everyone, I think generally, it's kind of that honeymoon period of a relationship. It's the emotional gas that's sort of so ambient you can't even put your finger on it. It's just the honeymoon feeling of expectations and fantasies and things like that. It's not really the real person. You're infatuated with a fantasy image of them. But with love, for me, the term seems concrete, and one word keeps dropping into love for me, and that's the word of trust. I cannot drop the word of trust in infatuation or, you know, the honeymoon period or whatever. To get to trust, then for me, knowing what that love is follows, if that makes sense. So the word trust keeps being like a bubble or an umbrella around my definition of love. Whereas I can't put the word trust in infatuation at all.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think most men, whether they verbalize it or not, I think of for most men, the definition of love certainly contains a component of loyalty and trust, and I'm sure it does with women as well. But I think if you talk to men who have experienced failed relationships, I think a lot of them struggle with the idea of a lack of loyalty or dedication. So I certainly agree, human. I think for most men, the idea of trust and loyalty is a key component of how they define love.
Yeah, I don't think you can you can actually get to love realistically, or feel that you can, like, you can say the words. And I've been there in the past where you're with a girl and you want this image of a relationship. You see this potential in her. There's this fantasy of what it could become. And you walk on eggshells trying to please her and get it to work and say everything to get it there. And it never gets there, and you never trust it. Whereas when the eggshells aren't there, you just know it is. Just like I know I love members of my family. I know the reality of things. I don't have to hope for them to be something. They just are the way they are. And that's the trust part of it. And until you get there, you can want it as much as you can. You can want an incompatible person as much as you can. You know, if only they didn't have this elephant in the room part of their personality, then they would be the perfect partner or the perfect relationships. But, you know, they are the elephant in the room, like it's always going to be there. But yeah, the difference between me is the infatuation is the relationship you only have in your head, and love is actually the real one, the touching grass, the feedback loop of, you know, you see the person, they see you. You take the good and the bad, they take the good and the bad of you. There's this comfortable understanding, this unromantic understanding, ambient warmth of the real you and them. Whereas the infatuation is the potential, the fantasy, and it's largely, if not completely, all in your head. And I wonder if a lot of men and women, but especially women, love in an infatuation style so much that after the honeymoon, the real person creeps in more and more, that nothing compares to the infatuation. So you can never get to actual love or the actual real person.
But is it love after that? Isn't it just a friend?
No. Like, again, is if your definition of love is infatuation, then yeah. But if you get to know the real person, the person that's in jeans and t-shirt, you know their good side, their bad side, they're consistent, they are a friend that you also want to take to bed, and you know they occupy all the elements that a sort of a romantic partner would. Then it's not just a friend. If you don't have the physical, intimate, sort of primitive side where you want to be with them more than just friends, then yeah. But or are you just being devil's advocate, Karu?
No. I just find that the idea of love is just exceptionally hard to define. And I think the Greeks were right when they defined multiple types of love, because I just find it hard to fit everybody's particularity within that definition, because we'll never agree on what's part of it and what's not. Because you can be you can't argue that you're in love with someone but not really trust them. I mean, think of abusive households. Think of children that have no option than to love their parents because they're the only providers that they have, and so on and so forth. So it's for me, it's my engineering mind just isn't clear enough with the definition, but I understand where you're trying to point at with what you're saying.
Well, yeah, sure. There's a very big difference, and I guess it's not so much that it's a subjective definition, but it needs to be an honest definition as well for you. Not that my definition needs to be yours, but what you say is very true. If you know that love should be a very understandable term for you, obviously the kid who just says they love their parents, you don't really love them. You have to say it so you're protected by them and you're not out on the street and you're not punished. So you really just say the words that keep you safe. That to me is very different from saying and meaning the words that mean something from a virtue-based definition, if that makes sense. So you can explain your standards for love. right? And if the person meets them, then you can justify loving them. But you don't, I'm not asking for a definition of something that everyone agrees on, because the definition of love for a person that was brought up in an abusive household that's an extrovert is very different from the definition of love that someone who was brought up in a loving household that's an introvert. You know, your standards and ethics for love and what you define as love, or how you would say, if someone said, oh, you love your partner, sure, why do you love them? Your answers for that would be very different. So it is subjective, but I think there's a range of objectivity as well.
Mm-hmm. What would be your what would be your definition?
Well, trust is a big one. That just keeps screaming at the front of me. Why do I particularly trust them? And then I need to point to things, not to convince other people, but to really to help me explain why I know the way I feel. It's not just a feeling, because a feeling could just be infatuation. Obviously, there's also time. I don't think you can actually love a person without the time enough to trust them through consistency. A consistent image of the person by which to trust them, and then to really love them. Because part of trusting them is to see them clearly, not just the infatuation fantasy you have in your head when you first see them. You see a hot chick, you might have a flood of snapshots of the future of what you want her to be, or finally, this is the image that I want in the future. This is the potential. This is the preview to the movie that I want to see, but the movie's very different. So I think time and trust actually make love for you real.
I'm not satisfied with that, because that's more of a descriptor rather than a definition. What about you, Boffin?
I think I actually read through Human's Community tab where he posed the question earlier, and I think Realistic Delinquent summed it up nicely. He said, "Love is mutual. It cannot be unrequited," and I think that's also a good. It's a good way to judge whether something is infatuation or whether it's really love. If two, you have to remember that love is in the romantic sense, it's a dance between two people. So if you're wildly drawn to someone in a romantic way, but that affection isn't returned, you're not really in love. You're infatuated. Someone is infatuated, but two people aren't in love. So I think that's a good way to differentiate between infatuation and love. Two people have to be doing it.
Yeah. Are you dancing alone or together?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
you're not satisfied?
No. I am still not satisfied.
Is it the pessimist in you is not satisfied, or like what are you looking for?
I'm looking for a definition, and I'll try to give one, and it may be just my fever talking, so cut me some slack. But I'll say this: love is needing someone at a moment where you're at perfect peace with yourself. At the moment when you're truly balanced and you feel that everything is in focus, having that sensation of just needing that other person next to you. That's probably the closest way that I could describe it.
Yeah, maybe. See, I'm not convinced with that either. Because there's been moments with me where
go ahead.
I'm just getting flashes of moments where I was completely content, and then you see your partner, and then you're reminded of why you're happy. You don't need them, but it's a reminder, and then you get a flood of that feeling. So it's not that I'm in a low and I'm reaching for someone to kind of make me feel better.
Yeah, but there's still a what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for? There's still a catalyst for your happiness at that point. I'm saying that you're already maxed out on that. You're fully happy, you're fully content, you have everything that you need, but you still get the sensation that having this person next to you, even though you're at your maximum, would not necessarily improve it, but you just need them there. It's essentially you've reached nirvana, but it would be nice if they were there with you. Or you need them to be there with you, would be a better way to put it.
What about the practical aspect? Obviously, it's generalized that women are much more kind of fantasy, sort of infatuation style, based around their vision of their love affair with the person or what they want it to be. And men's sense of love is much more practical. Would that be a fair assessment?
I don't know if I'd be comfortable saying that.
Mm.
I
You
think
didn't
a lot
have
of
plastic surgeons back in your day.
I think a lot of men, especially young men, are just as unrealistic about what love means as young women. Now, you can make the case that maybe men kind of grow out of it better than women do, but I think a lot of guys have pretty unrealistic expectations for what love means.
I'll drink to that.
But that's why I'm suggesting that the more practical your expectations of what love is, the healthier it might be, or at least the more workable it could be in real life. Whereas if you have them in a more fantasy-based, infatuation-style, perfection, idealistic version of what you expect from love, it'll never match it. You'll always be let down. And as a consequence, you'll probably more and more believe that love doesn't exist. It's bullshit. It's a fantasy, just because of what you expect love to be.
Yeah.
So I think the less rose-colored glasses romantic you define it as, and kind of bring it down to something more practical and, you know, for want of a better word, more boring and pedestrian, I think then love will work for you in a much more practical sense. Whereas if you kind of keep it up there as the honeymoon infatuation style celebrity vision of what a relationship should be, it's always going to let you down.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, Karu does. Come on, Karu. Let me have it.
Yeah, well, I just don't know, because it reminds me of the self-improvement discussion. I mean, if it's something you can quantify, a lot more people can relate to it and they can chase it. And considering how many can just detach from reality and just spend their time doing inane things over and over again, I think that having a more loose and imaginative definition, or even a lack of a definition, just giving individuals kind of the freedom to find out what quote unquote love means to them. God, I feel like I'm a female talking right now. What it means to them, I think, gives a lot more chance for Boffin's ideal society to actually exist, where people get together and they get married and they prolong the culture.
Yeah. Well, look, I get what you mean. Like, even just saying the word love, it's kind of like coming out of it. It just does sound very vaginal. No.
I don't have an issue with the word. I have an issue with what I said, where when I mentioned let everybody find their own definition. Everybody's healthy at every weight, guys. Like, that just hurt me the wrong way.
No, of course but I think the importance of acknowledging, because guys do touch on what they mean by that when they say brothers and honor. It's that trust and ambient feeling of security around someone else, where you get them, they get you, you trust each other. that's the thing I think guys would, I would find more comfortable as a definition of love and trust and all of that. Whereas the amorphous, gaseous kind of like romantic Cinderella honeymoon period expectations that a lot of overly romantics do, I don't agree with that. I get you, but I think there's something being able to talk about it, because if you want a stable, trusting relationship with someone, love encapsulates that, but being unable to kind of even talk about the word or what it is, yeah, replace it with trust, or you can talk about this with friends, even back in the past, and Boffin would acknowledge this especially. Guys had less of a problem with the word love. Even the ancient Greeks, loving their fellow man, loving their brother, and respect and love could be attributed to another guy. And now it's almost like, no, women use that, men are very practical. And I find so many guys are going so hard at being mathematical in the way they would find a relationship, where if they would just give themselves permission to define what love means to them and use the word and know what they expect from it in a practical sense, rather than avoid it and try and use a calculator and mathematics to define it, like, male nature and hypergamy and all that sort of stuff that really doesn't answer what they want to be solved, I think it would go a long way. So I understand your uncomfortable sort of circling around this, but I think it's precisely where a lot of guys need to sort of define what they expect from the other person in a relationship. Otherwise, it's always cold, and that's not what you want. Or am I still being vague?
No. You're not being vague, but as I mentioned, I don't have an issue with the topic or the word. I just hate having very loose definitions of things, and things that I just can't point at and be genuinely practical. Because I know that the list of requirements and the things that I would like and appreciate aren't exactly 100% identical to yours or to Boffin's or to anyone else's. So I don't like that level of ambiguity in the air, because that's probably where a lot of the disagreements might come from. Or I wouldn't even call them disagreements, just minuscule differences between what either of us appreciates.
Well, would you agree then? I touched on, I said, like, say, as a universal definition, would you agree that you can't actually love anyone objectively unless you can trust them? Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's an important component. Yeah.
So how would you get to trust them? To get to love, so take love out of the equation. That's the step after. How do you get to trust?
Ooh, that's a hard question.
This is what I mean. What are the concatenation factors of getting to love? Because love is the destination, and then you try and maintain the destination into the future. But how do you get there? And that's why I keep finding trust is a gateway to get to love, because you can't get there. You can hope, you can bullshit your way, you can be a nice guy, you can stay off certain topics to keep the girlfriend, but you're not going to get there but you have to be yourself, allow them to see you completely and you see them completely, trust each other consistently over time. So time and trust will lead you to whatever you're comfortable with in love, like what you need from the person. So what would, say, be a good universal for you to trust someone that you could sort of dish out to your best friend as advice?
Oh, I don't know. As I said, it's a hard question, because that varies, to me at least, from individual to individual. Like, if I were to use you as an example, the thing that made me trust you is how similar you are, both when you're online and offline. It's one of the things that level of being genuine is something that made me trust you. With Boffin, it was the interactions that I've had with him, his consistency. With other people, there were just different things that made me trust them. I don't know, leaving my keys with them for a couple of days and then not having anything missing from the house, or bringing me a bottle of water when I didn't expect it and I needed to drink something.
So what would be the similarity there? Because what I hear is you get along with the person initially. Is there a consistency over time and a trust that feeling is consistent, or it grows and it gets more and more trusting and open? Would that be accurate then, that the person's consistent and your initial impression of them doesn't go backward?
That, and I would add on to it I wouldn't want to call it a shit test, but ultimately that's what it is. Overcoming a situation where I potentially risk something that they need to pass, that they need to overcome. I think trust a lot of the times is achieved by overcoming some form of adversity, or doing something unexpected from someone that gains their favor. I think those are the easiest ways to gain trust. Because, yeah, you can gain trust over time, but then you can just spend a lot of time with someone, assume that you trust them, and the second you let them borrow some money, they disappear from your life, which has happened to me and to a bunch of other acquaintances in my life. And these weren't people that they've known for a month or two. I think that you need a bit more practical proof when it comes to trust, rather than just time and consistency. Because it's very easy to be consistent with words and small actions. When there's a genuine price to pay, I think things kind of delve in a different direction.
Yeah, but that's part of the practical aspect of you can stay in your infatuation world, but the longer you spend with the person, you unless there's something wrong with you, you can't deny the reality of the world the time you're spending with the person. If they contradict themselves, if they say one thing but do another. So time spent with them should reveal to you quite plainly whether or not you that initial impression, your compatibility keeps going. So I would say time and trust consistently, trust over time, and them being consistent over time will kind of lead you to the definition of love, your particular definition of love. But that time and consistency is a factor to get to trust that will lead you to love, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll give you an example from, I think this was from Dr. House, if I'm not mistaken, where the main character kept asking one of his friends for a bigger and bigger sum of money each year that he would eventually return to him. And he was looking for the point where the guy would say no. He was looking for the monetary value that his friend was willing to put on the relationship. And I think it's somewhat similar when it comes to trust. You need to be able to have a level of vulnerability that you put in, and then see if it gets trampled on or not.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, at some point, and I think this is the fault of many people trying to date or be intimate with someone by having concrete walls up and always insisting that the other person go first all the time, while they never risk anything. So you do need to kind of say, well, one of us has to go first, and why not me? So you give off a little bit, and you're testing whether or not it's going to be your affection or what you're giving out to the person, or the level of trust you're giving to them, is going to be respected and returned, or it's just going to be used and thrown away. And it's the only way you're going to tell. So you have to dish out these kind of little, you can call them tests, but I just think they're ways of letting go and just being with the person in the correct way, rather than this stoic artificial wall and waiting for the other person to show their cards before you do. You have to show one of your cards, or at least one of you does.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good test of your ability to judge how well you know the other person. If because think about it this way, it doesn't matter how much you trust someone if your expectations of them are beyond their abilities. I've encountered situations where very cold people, because of their particular mental disorders, they just couldn't. They're not good at expressing their feelings. They're not good at keeping in contact. They're really good people, but they just have particular ailments that just make them unable to relate to people in the same way that you and I would. And they encounter this issue with everyone that they try to get close to. Eventually, they get to a discussion where the constant complaint is, oh, well, you're not a good friend. You don't know how to be a friend. You're betraying me. You're doing all of these things. And it has nothing to do with them personally. It's with them. It's like asking somebody with no legs to run a marathon. And you're essentially running into a situation where you're judging somebody for a lack of ability on their end. And that's also something that you need to take into account. You need to know the type of person that you're interacting with. There needs to be some familiarity there, as you said, some time investment.
Yeah, Billy the Goat, actually, I think, was it him? He wrote something here that I want to share on screen. Let me put it up. He said, can you trust yourself first? I think that's a big, because this expectations, which still might be infatuation, you can expect a lot from the person that's unrealistic. But if you actually don't trust your own judgment, if you expect too much of them, if you expect them to be your mother in a Freudian sense, if you expect them to save you, I think you're still living in that fantasy world. So it's the ability to treat yourself realistically and see yourself accurately, or as practically, let's say, and instead of accurately, see yourself as practically and as realistically and as normal as you can, and try and relate to other people and try and insist that relationship is very practical and reasonable and fair. Then you'll be able to assess if you can trust them over time. All these little quirks and disorders, yeah, I agree. If you're going to be with someone, you need to accept the good and the bad as well. And you have to also recognize whether the person is being intentional. If the person has got a character trait that is always putting their foot in their mouth, and it's always straining their relationships, and they have no ability to reflect and realize that they're acting subpar, then that's again, can you live with it? Are they acknowledging faults or negative parts of their character where it's causing them problems with everybody? But maybe with you, it's not such a big deal. There's a difference between someone who's got, you mentioned your friend that can't help being a certain way. But if you're with someone that understands you and you're being open about it, you're not hiding and gaslighting them. And if you're a person that's got a temper, you gaslight other people and say, well, it's not me, it's you. You need to understand me. It's like, no, they don't. They don't need to understand you. So it all depends in the cooperative way you're getting along with the person, and if the person is acknowledging themselves good and bad, and then after that, whether or not you can live with the combination of good and bad. And then, because no one's going to be perfect, you can't have your standards saying, my standards for love is they're exactly like me, and they're a perfect version of me, and they treat me exactly the way I want, they read my mind, and there's never any negative traits about them. It's too unrealistic. Everyone's going to have little ways they disappoint themselves, and in the ways they disappoint themselves, and to the degree in which they're honest about it and put their hand up, you can understand that and realize they're not being cruel and intentional. It's just character traits. And if you can live with it, that's fine. But if you don't have that very practical way of being with them, to trust that, yeah, I love them by their compatible, like their positive compatible traits with me, but also I'm willing to live with the trade-offs of their negative ones because they aren't big enough to cause problems in our lives. You mentioned your friend, you wish the person didn't have it, but is it directly interfering between the two of you, or is it something that is just part of the package? Like you own a dog and you need to clean up its poop, or you need to take it for a walk. That's just part of the package, and you're fine with living with it. There's a big difference between that.
Yeah, well, there's a very easy way to trust yourself. Just go to the gym, start a business, and that'll fix all your trust issues in regards to yourself. It's just the easiest way to get out of your own head. But when it comes to my friend, I am not at all bothered by this particular set of circumstance. I even mentioned it to him in a message. Look, I had two choices that I could go. I could either accept you for who you are with all your positives and negatives, or I could have just done the same thing. And the first time I got the impression that I was being avoided or that something negative was happening, I could have just perked out at you. And that wouldn't have led in any positive direction. And it's just about how much you appreciate people and how much you're willing to understand them. Because if it's something that they genuinely can't help, there's no reason for me to try to judge them. And even then, it's a good training exercise. Like, yeah, you have someone that disappears for prolonged periods of time, that whatever. Yeah, you use that as training. There will be people in your lives that will act the same way, and they'll do it intentionally. At least this time, you know that it isn't.
What about you, Boffin? From what Karu and I have been talking, what do you think about all this?
I think this is what makes the discussion so interesting, Human. I think we're trying to encapsulate an emotion with a word. And when you say to someone, "I'm deeply in love," try to equate that to saying, "I'm deeply offended." What does it mean? And I think it goes back to something you said earlier in the discussion. I think the reality is that love means something different to every person. We recognize it's some strong emotion. There's something to do with binding yourself to another person in a very intensely emotional sense. But I don't think there's any way you can define it universally any more than you can define what is universally offensive.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And I think the point that you made earlier, I think probably people's idea and concept of what love is formed, early in their life based on, either a particular something that they experienced, or maybe a lack of something in their young life.
It could just be, as you're kind of pointing to, it could just be, this person makes me happy to be around, and then you can ask yourself why. Similarly, I feel very uncomfortable around this person. This person makes me stressed, sad, negative.
Yeah.
Why? So it could just be sort of the dichotomy between the two. A lot of guys have that mental friction of, I'm infatuated with the person and I want it to be good, but I'm always walking on eggshells. No matter what I do, however I try to make this work, I'm always incompatibly on eggshells with this chick, and it never gets comfortable. And so I'm never feeling the way I want to feel.
Yeah, it's
And
very
if your
intangible.
so if the expectation is reasonable, if you know, well, with her, I'm always feeling insecure and not quite comfortable, and I can never quite trust her completely and be completely open, but I can with my friends, my best friend, my family members, with my hobbies, like with so many other parts of my life where I love all these other things and people, but with her, I can't. And asking the question why I can't really love her, or why I don't feel comfortable or good around her. Take the word love. Why aren't I happy and completely open and at peace around this person compared to uncomfortable, out of place, non-trusting? I need to have my hand on my sword, ready to kind of like I'm ready to press the survival button in me at any point. Compared to with family and friends, I don't have my hand anywhere near it. I feel completely safe. I can feel
Yeah.
completely understood. So it really is your own definition of where you feel happy and comfortable compared to where you feel in danger or you're walking on eggshells and something's not quite right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of those placeholder words where we're trying to capture very complex human emotions with a single word. And, everyone recognizes that we're trying to get a point across when we use this word, but the word itself really doesn't. There's no hard definition for the word. And
Mm,
I was listening to the discussion that you and Carew were having about trust, which I think is, again, I think it's typically male to think along these lines: trust, loyalty, these things that males tend to value, where women, I think, are more likely to talk about excitement and feeling alive and drama and all of the things we typically associate with the female idea of love and romance. But I want to toss a little monkey wrench into the discussion you were having with trust. I knew a person who was deeply in love with someone that was completely untrustworthy. And that didn't alter the fact that they were still deeply in love with this person. And I think that when you try to pick these carved in granite concepts or definitions, at least at a foundational level of what constitutes love, I think even that is oversimplification, because I think there are a bunch of convoluted emotions that that are floating around out there, and once you try to, to, like I said, even foundational definitions of what love is, I think you're not capturing the entirety of the conversation.
mm. But I think it's actually whether you use the word love or not. Where where do you feel comfortable, trusting, like you basically, I keep coming back to the word trust. Where do you feel trusting and comfortable with the person where you don't have to have your armor up? You can be completely yourself. And why? And why with this other person or chick or somebody, you really want it to be different and it just won't? And why is that? Why can't you trust this person, i.e., why can't you embrace them completely, which is the way I see the word love? Why can't you be completely embracing of this thing without any kind of insecurities?
Because
David P, I just wanted to read his comment here. He said, infatuation won't last. Let me highlight it here. Long-time subscriber. He says, infatuation won't last when life's challenges start showing up. Love can survive the challenges if there is honesty, communication, and a desire to work together. This I agree with. I think David and I are usually on the same page with these kind of comments. And I was looking around investigating what people generally see as infatuation and what generally people see as love. And infatuation as well reminded me of something David said. And I came up with, yes, infatuation fades quickly when faced with challenges. You know, when the real world intrudes, when the pedestrian life intrudes, the rose-colored glasses of infatuation just kind of disappears. And also infatuation is often idealized, unrealistic, and regularly projects desires onto the other person. So, what do you guys think about that?
I think it's a good definition, but I think it's also kind of a precursor to many long-lasting, loving relationships. I know that sounds ironic, but I think, most romantic relationships begin with some form of infatuation.
Oh, sure, the initial phase, but it's why I always don't. I've never felt comfortable. I want it to disappear. I want that high to end, and then the rose-colored glasses to be removed, and us to just be used to each other and feel comfortable with each other. That is love to me. When the honeymoon period has dissipated and you still enjoy being with the person, it's a very practical, comfortable love. The way I feel with family and friends, albeit a very different type of relationship, but it's the same structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
You know, I want the brochure to be gone. For me, infatuation, the honeymoon period is the brochure. It's the holiday. It's the momentary thrill. I want it to not be the brochure. I want the thing, the real, practical, day-to-day, naked thing without all the window dressing and expectations. I want the expectations to be gone, and I don't expect, I just know what it is. I know what the person is. The practical day-to-day aspects of it have been shown to be what it is now.
I agree with you, Human. I agree with you, Human, and I'm curious if you think that would be a typical response from a woman.
I haven't come across a lot of women who can, because I think this is it. When you try and come up with definitions, if you're trying to be serious, you will try to come up with definitions that are practical and that are in some way you're trying to develop rules in which yourself in yourself, rather than the Oprah style definition of, love is love, and that's the only definition they need. The emotion is the emotion. But I think myself and most guys are trying to find a definition that at least they themselves can use, by which, like as a compass or a standard when they go on dates or trust a friend or pick a job. You need, if you've got emotions that feel good, rather than them surprising you, and if you like them, you want to know how to recreate them, or when you get them, to keep them going. And so if you do feel good, you feel in love, or you trust someone and you enjoy being around them, why and how can you keep it going? And what are the standards that got you there? What are the standards that can keep it going, like communication, things like that? So I think this is why myself and a lot of us guys always come back to finding a system or a structure by which to keep love, get love, find a compatible person, rather than approaching everything like we're rolling the dice and praying to the gods that we not only get it, but that the gods are kind enough that they let us keep it.
And I agree with everything you just said, but it didn't answer my question.
Sorry, what was the question?
Do you think that women would define love in the way that you just defined it and described it? The typical woman?
No.
Okay. Yeah. And that's my only point, because we're both using the same word.
Sure.
So
wouldn't I'm just thinking for myself, but wouldn't that also would help you find the right person? Because I don't care what the typical woman says, a woman that would find my definition at least interesting, or want to talk to me about it and say, okay, that's interesting. You think of love this way. That would get me to trust her more or think she's more compatible for me or be able to be with her more. So I don't really care that most women think of love like Oprah. I would agree with you, but at the end of the day, the point is moot because that kind of just eliminates most women from my world, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And assuming that you're mature enough to take the discussion to that level with the person that you're interested in, then you can work through that. But the problem is that the immature man never takes the discussion to that level to make sure that you're on the same page in terms of your definition and understanding of love and love in a lasting relationship.
Yeah, I think Karu wanted to say something before we interrupted him. What were you going to say, Karu?
I think you made a very important point before we went live, and I'm going to bring it up in the discussion and add a bit of an extra layer to it. I think infatuation stops when you learn to appreciate the entire package, both the positives and the negatives, and then you can try to not necessarily try, but then you can start to love someone. When you have the entire package and you appreciate all of it, the same way that I appreciate my friend. It doesn't matter what her qualities are, what her negatives are. I just appreciate them exactly as they are.
Yeah, she comes with parts that it would be nice if they weren't there, but unfortunately they are there, and that's fine. That's part of her character. So compatible love is they've got things in them that aren't deal breakers, but they're perfectly fine to live with because you understand the way they express themselves rather than being punched in the face by them and having to tolerate things. Again, it's more of a leads back to you need to know what you want clearly, and then you're better able to assess what you can live with the other person. Otherwise, if you don't know what you want and you want perfection, then any lack of perfection from, say, your friend, everything's a red flag, and red flags are meant to be tossed out. You toss the whole person away. And unless all of us are perfect, every one of us is going to be tossed away, and that's what everyone's doing.
Yeah.
I would also not remind people as in telling them what to do, but I'm reminding myself of this based on what you just said, Karu, is that I see infatuation as really as the fantasy you have in your head of the relationship you either could have. I'm talking of the manosphere and dating coaches online, or when you get it, you continue the fantasy. And so you're not really having a relationship or trying to with the other person. Infatuation is that distance relationship, the arm's length fantasy relationship that you insist on having, whether or not the person is actually there or not. You try and force them to be that way. Typically, women, overly entitled people will force the other person to become someone else or insist they become someone else. So I think the infatuation is you having the relationship in your head. And as you mentioned with your friend, actual love and trust and a real touching grass kind of acceptance is an actual relationship with the person's good and bad qualities that in aggregate, you love their character, everything about them. Not an idealized version that you had before you met them and that you impose upon them. So I don't know, would it be fair to say that the lack of imposing your expectations on a person and you still trusting and loving them would be more genuine love?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's more of a shift from the idea of a person to what they actually are. Because you can be infatuated with ideas. Look at the newcomers to the manosphere that find the vernacular and everything else for the first time, and they feel like they're getting enlightened, and they just dive into this entire new world like they're Aladdin on their flying carpet, and just go full hog with whatever they can find, and they voraciously consume the content, only to realize that a very small part of it is actually truly useful in their day-to-day, if it's not outright sabotaging them.
Well, yeah, I just, my thing, whenever I try and see the difference between infatuation and love, for me, it's like, can I really trust her character? You know, it's not just trust her character. You mentioned, Karu, the good and the bad, the person in totality, like from every angle, not just, her looking good, her looking the way she looks when she gets out of bed and she's tired, or the way they look when they're sick, the way they're just lazing, like them from completely figuratively naked to, presented well and polite and knowing how they act at church or in front of your family and things like that. Like across the board, you see them without masks, with polite masks, like you see their opinion in judging and dealing with life when they have to show their morals. Do their morals and your morals align? So you see the person in totality. So you see their character. So it's more of, you trust their character and what their character is capable of and how their character treats you. So it's less about trusting them in specific, but the specifics have taken care of themselves over time by proving that they react in certain ways to certain situations. And so you get a sense of the person's character. So with your friend you mentioned, Karu, you've got a total understanding and a viewpoint from all angles of this person's character. And there's a trust factor of you seeing all of it. And then say that's a romantic partner, you see the person from all angles in the same way. And then again, you can holistically love a person because you're not seeing them in an idealistic way, like, oh, they're perfect, I love them in this Cinderella kind of way. You just love them as a normal human being in their failings and their imperfections, as well as their compatible great qualities that you never got from anyone else. So it's kind of like a whole trusting and seeing a whole person's good and bad. In a lesser way or a different way that us guys, we get online and we talk, we see each other's humor, the way we jab each other, where we can trust each other. For instance, between you and Karu and Boffin, like the level of sort of intimacy, where we trust each other compared to somebody else. Like you get a really nice whole sort of every angle view of the person, and you'd hope they'd do it with you. But then again, I'm presupposing everyone's letting their guard down, which not everyone does.
But isn't that what makes everything charming and more interesting? Because the qualities you tend to take for granted, it's always the negatives that kind of, in a sense, it's also the negatives that make you like somebody. Because you get to see the small little imperfections, things that make you laugh that probably shouldn't. Sure, sometimes their negatives can be outright infuriating, but there's a lot of charm that comes with them at the same time. Like if you know that they're bad at, I don't know, gardening or whatever they do, and you see them fumbling around, it can be quite endearing.
Oh, sure. And I think that's that pops up with couples, especially if you're not compatible in like your virtues. If you're compatible with a person, those are ostensibly negative traits. If you're compatible, they will be endearing, as you said. You will start to love them because of that. Like that's a quirky quality that they have that in someone else may have annoyed me, but with you, it's an added specific reason why I love that part about you. But I've been with incompatible women where that quality infuriates me. Like, so again, it really does matter. Like So you holistically look at the person, and these little quirks start to annoy you when you're incompatible. But when you're compatible, the little quirks you're grateful for because they're endearing little picadillos about the person.
I want to know why Boffin was laughing. He's gonna tell us an old story.
No, I was just thinking about the point of something that you find really irritating in one person is something that's actually endearing in another person. But I think, listening to the conversation and thinking about it as we go along, I think a big component that we haven't touched on is just the whole idea of friendship. What draws two people together as friends? And I think, if you try to relate it to the discussion about love, it's probably a good thing to try to work into your thought process. There are lots of interesting, educated, exciting people out there that you can interact with. And as you interact with them, you find people that you just click with. You don't know why, but there's just some kind of simpatico. You may come from very different backgrounds, very different life experiences, but there's something that clicks and you form a friendship. And you can't make a list of all the reasons why. It just happens. It's a part of that very intangible human interaction. And I don't know, maybe love is that simpatico relationship, or that person that you find, and then you layer on top of that romance and sex. That
Well,
may be the most.
sorry, I was just going to say, like, another way of looking at it, I'm looking at the difference between the relationships in my life where I love different people. My brother, we don't talk about this sort of stuff. Ours is a very kind of old school cowboy, uh, discussion. We don't talk about feelings, but I can rely on him and trust him completely to be there for me in certain ways. I compare that with Stephanie, who I talk to, and we're under each other's skin in conversation and thought. Our inner worlds are shared. It's a very different trust, and where I can rely on a person and the breadth of that reliance and trust. So my brothers is very different to my sisters, to Stephanie. And so it's not, I think people are looking for, okay, there's one definition of love that you can just like put this costume on every single person and you love them the same way. It's not that way, because what I count on and the way I love my brother is very different to my sister, to Stephanie, to my friends, and all of that sort of stuff. And there's nothing wrong, and even more than that, not that there's nothing wrong, but that's completely natural to know how and why you trust or can rely on someone to be someone that you do trust. Do you think that would be a good question to ask people? Like, if they do love someone or trust them, is how do you rely on them and how can you count on that? So say you've got a girlfriend or wife and the person says, yeah, I do love them. Okay, how do you trust them and how can you rely on them being consistent to deliver that level of trust and love that you have, your view of them? Like, can you rely on that image you have, that belief in them and you, like that love between you and them, that trust between you and them? Is it reliable or not? Has it ever been broken? Is it consistent?
Yeah, I think any thinking person would certainly take that into consideration. They'd make that assessment. But I think the problem when you talk about love is that there are layers. We've been talking about love in layers and trying to break it down and dissect it, but there's also that strong emotional component. And I think that the problem that a lot of people have is they can't separate out what you were just talking about, human, that very rational part of what you view as a big component of love with the emotional, the animalistic, emotional, undefinable part of attraction. So I think what you just described is certainly something that a well-reasoned thinking person considers. The problem is that I'm not sure how many people really take the time or make the effort to think about it that way.
Yeah, it's certainly not certainly not a romantic. I can just imagine. I'm laughing at the amount of times if I've been on dates and I like the person and I start talking like this, and I never ended up getting them to the bedroom because this doesn't turn anyone on. This is a very
Exactly.
intellectual discussion, and it doesn't lead to the bedroom at all.
Exactly.
You mean like a woman with an education?
Well, yeah, the one or two times that the couple of times in the past when I've obviously, in retrospect, been with the wrong kind of person, is that they found this intellectual curiosity attractive in the same reason a sociopath likes watching serial killer movies, where they like to get under the skin psychologically, and that's kind of like this a turn on for them. Rather, it's not a personal conversation the way we're having now about just very mundane life. It's this fantasy psychological thriller kind of turn on that they have about having these kind of conversations. But I didn't realize that until I found out they were borderline later on. But yeah, I just feel like these conversations, even if they're not popular amongst, the macho men's type of self-help, is that if you really want to, if you're tired of the merry-go-round and you really just want to find the one person, or you can stay single. I have to reiterate, because a lot of people think that I'm insisting that you only find happiness with someone. You don't. In today's world and the way most people are, you're better off being alone, because most people out there are, for one, very incompatible, very entitled, and most of all, almost everyone is very political. They've been sort of conditioned politically out there. There's very little of them, or they've got such a thick layer of politics and indoctrination, as you say, Boffin, that you can't even be bothered trying to get under the surface. You feel like, I don't want to be your psychologist. Kind of turn up on a date after your therapy. Don't turn up to a date. Like, I mean, some people might think that I, like the level of discussion I have, I need therapy. I'm overthinking a lot of things. I'm too neurotic. But yeah, I got tired of dating because the more I was trying to be as honest as I can and talk these ways openly and brush away all the politics, I just noticed the amount of politics and walls in front of themselves that people put. I was just sick of it.
Yeah, I think
go ahead, Buffin.
No, go ahead, Crew.
I think a good middle ground would be if they showed up to the date with their therapist.
Yeah. You'd be able to have a fair conversation. Well, it's go ahead, Boffin, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the real value in these conversations are for the people who have consumed all of the kind of the standard men's community content, and they eventually realize that they're listening to a discussion on repeat. And I think these discussions are valuable, and it may only be for a small portion of the audience, but I think it's all food for thought. I don't think any of us are pretending that we have an answer to a lot of these topics that we talk about. But for the people who are interested in taking it beyond the kind of rinse and repeat material that gets presented in the men's community, it's food for thought. maybe we say
Mm.
something that sparks an idea or something that you can relate to, then you can follow up on your own. To me, that's the real value of conversations like this.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Boff, and be honest. We have the solution, and the solution is very simple. Go out and touch grass. It's just that some people need to touch a rainforest.
They need the total immersion experience, Guru.
Yeah. To the point that they don't want to touch anything green ever again. But look, again, it's this knowledge and these discussions are invaluable to sort of see the whole map and landscape. But at some point, you have to, as Karu mentioned, touch grass. You have to make a choice. You have to go out there and say, I'm going to touch this person, or go on a date, or not, or leave this thing, or not do this anymore. It's I think people are fooling themselves in thinking they're going to find perfect answers. We can all objectively discuss the problems. They're universal. Your answer is to find your choices that you're willing to make and see if they work. That's
exactly
it. That's the answer. It's not a universal answer, because all these people want universal answers that they can go back to the manosphere or their group of chads and give high fives and saying, yeah, I made $1 million. I got a 6-pack. I've got this girlfriend. Do you guys approve? She's hot, right? Yeah. Yeah, we give you a 10 out of 10. You did fine, buddy. It's like, why do I need... We've gone from the approval of women that we realize is, not the way to go, and then kind of replace that same dynamic with the approval of dating and the male self-help. Like, that's not the answer.
Yep.
We've got universal problems, but very, very specific choices to make for our own solutions. And no one wants to do that. No one wants to touch the grass. They want to touch the virtual grass where they never choose anything.
Yep. Agreed.
Also, I forgot, anyone who wants to ask a question during the stream, please, we're about to wrap up in another 10 to 15 minutes. So if anyone has any final questions, either super chat me during the stream and I'll read out your comment or question, or alternatively add 3 yellow emojis. Where is it? An example. Someone put 3 yellow emojis so I can show an example. I haven't done it. Anyway. Yeah, I can't. Anyway, I didn't prepare that. But add 3 yellow smiley faces before your comment or question, and I'll see it during the stream. Oh, there we go. Karu just did one. Thanks, man. So just kind of do that before your question and or comment, and I'll read it out. But yeah, any last comments or questions to people in the stream, drop them in now. We'll go for another 10 to 15 minutes and wrap it up. And we'll just go on our final thoughts. And I think we've pretty much gotten to the end that it's the answers to this are really the choices you're prepared to make in, for me on this topic is, okay, if I love my hobby or the person I'm with, or I love my friends, I should be able to tell you why I love them. And thereby, if you tell me why you love them, you're standing up for the reasons, like your values. Again, your particular choices. Not something that everyone is objectively going to say, yeah, everyone just go on a date with your 3 checklists, and if the person ticks them off, you can commit to them. No. Your checklist is very different from the next person's checklist. If you want kids, if you're religious, your checklist looks very different to mine, to Karu's, to Boffin's. What are your you guys' final thought on this, infatuation versus love, and being able to tell the difference?
I think most guys, especially like I said at the beginning of the conversation, I think most guys who have a little experience with romance have developed a sense of the difference between infatuation and love. There's no good analogy for the definition of love. I think the best one that I could come up with during the course of this conversation is finding the right dance partner. It's something very intangible, as you referenced several times in the discussion, Yuma. It's highly individualistic. Everyone has to find their own dance partner. The music that you're going to dance to, the costumes you're going to wear, the shoes that you're going to wear. I mean, these are all highly individualistic aspects of what people find attractive about one another, and there are no universal answers to any of this. And I think, the best I can say is when you find the right dance partner, you'll know.
Yeah, you got to just start dancing and figure out.
Yep, you have to get on the dance floor.
If you enjoy dancing with them, and if you want to continue dancing with them. But if they're always stepping on your feet, and you're always like, oh, that's fine, that's no problem, but you're always saying ow, ow,
yep,
and telling her she's a great dance partner, then it's on you.
Yep.
Your thoughts, Karu?
Well, I think that the only way to get an answer to those questions is life and experience. Without having gone through either one or the other, it's impossible to make the difference, particularly for yourself, and the degrees to which you kind of fall for either of them. So regardless in which situation you're at, try to approach it with a clear mind.
There are other cases. I've mentioned one or two of my high school buddies where they married their first girlfriend and they've been sort of together, and they seem like best friends, and they kind of grew together and got used to each other. And some would say, well, they're naive. They didn't get a good comparison, and they didn't find their hyper idealized, match. But then does it really matter where they seem ostensibly happy and they're friends and their life is good? So, yeah, it can be experience, and I think it should be experience the more times you get it wrong. So your experience almost insists that you should start to work things out, because it didn't, say, naturally fall into place like my high school buddy, where he came across someone. They were both young and naive enough that they were both brought up in similar ways where they instinctually just felt a compatibility without knowing it. And then as they got married and spent time together, they grew into each other while they still had a compatible base via their upbringing. But the more you develop on your own, the way I have, and the rest of us mostly have, is you become a very, very specific person as you grow up as an individual, and you haven't been with someone over the course of your young adulthood to your late. And then the only chances of you finding someone is a very specific, compatible person. So there's no longer the breadth of growing into each other. I'm not going to grow into someone who's largely divergent from who I am. So that's the you need to have these. Okay, you don't need to, but I would say it's in your best interest to have these discussions more and more the older you get, because it's the best chance of you finding a compatible person. Whereas when you're young and naive, you can grow into each other. There was a comment by Northern Guy. I just wanted to read that out. He said, a woman's definition of love versus a man's, ? Tongue in cheek, I remember I made a video a long time ago in the early days of my YouTube channel where I was largely working a lot of this stuff out for myself. I just knew what I didn't want. So I didn't want a woman who was materialistic. So I guess what I knew back then was that I knew what kind of version of love from a woman I didn't want. So my video then was, love for men is a tree, love for women is a Christmas tree. And those were the two differences of, I didn't want a woman who saw love as a Christmas tree. I wanted her to be leaning on my side, where she wasn't materialistic, and love was very practical, bare bones, naked. It was just the tree, and not with all the ornamentation around it. So men and women do see things differently, but at the end of the day, the more and more I've inquired on these topics, it matters less and less what all women want. It just really matters what you want. And if you can't fairly have standards to find someone, not Disney movie standards, but very mundane, everyday standards to find normal people that match you. If you can't have them, stay alone, but recognize when a normal person, when you cross their path, and you act fairly with them. And I think the golden rule would apply here too. I think a lot of people's expectations, they act and they expect a lot from other people in ways in which they wouldn't expect done to them. They expect so much more from other people that they would expect kind of from themselves. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. And to Northern Guy's point, I think there's general recognition in the men's community that the natural idea of what love means to a man and woman are different things. And I think that's all the more reason to make sure that you engage in very serious conversation with your love interest about what it actually means, how the two of you are going to meld both of your concepts of what love means.
Elijah said, what are your thoughts on dating, marriage, and relationships dynamics in the US? I don't know. It's too broad. Like, you're not going to find, I don't think you're going to find any answers there other than pointing to a clown show of what's obviously not for you. And pointing to the reality TV of dating out there is quite obviously what no one wants, what doesn't work. The answer or your choices should be, what do you want? What works for you? What will help you stay longer with the person? It's very easy to point out what we don't want. Ollie said, thoughts on how to deal with people that think I'm weird when I say I don't want to date or get married as a 32-year-old. Yeah, I was there my whole life. You just kind of, they get used to you saying no thank you or your standard answers, but just be honest or ignore them. It's just the same as people that you don't want to be around. Carrie says, when you find the right person, neither of you wants to be with anybody else. Yeah, that's a very good, basic, non-neurotic way of looking at it as well. Often these very simple explanations are pretty accurate too. Sorry, Karu, what was your thought? You wanted to say something?
On which point? Sorry?
No, I thought after Boffin you were about to give me your thoughts, but I interrupted, or you had nothing to say.
No. Nothing much to add after what Boffin said.
Boffin, you got a comment by Realistic Delinquent. Thanks for expanding my thoughts on the topic, Boffin. A comment doesn't allow me to apply sufficient mental wandering. All right, guys, if that's all the super chats and comments, thanks to my guests, Boffin and Karu. And I think these topics are not just, how can I put them? I encourage guys not to talk about them in an Oprah-style way, but to realize that the reason you want if you do want a consistent relationship, you just want one person. You don't want to be rotating circus freaks for the rest of your life, no matter how good they are in bed. Because after a while, you get a few, they're all just one variation of, the same tub of ice cream. You're going for like Rocky Road and you're going for whatever, but after a while you want to get healthy and you don't want ice cream anymore. And so when you want that kind of consistency and permanency in your life with a person, if you want that kind of company and trust and long-term going forward, like myself, I don't want to be on that merry-go-round. I don't want to be complaining about the very thing I want to get right. You've got to make your choices, pick what's good for you, and know the ways in which you're going about it so it's not luck. You're having conversations like we're having here. You have it on dates. And if they don't want to have it, it means they want to be on the circus merry-go-round. And you can't rely on luck and feelings to sustain it. And I never did. And these kind of discussions with like-minded people suggest that you guys are sick of it as well. You want some skill in either relating to another person or knowing, or have some skill in your bullet points of ethics of what is important to you. What qualities are deal breakers for yours? What kind of person are you, which lead into the deal breakers of someone who's not compatible with you? So knowing that if you want something long-term, it's got to be based on trust. And that's how you know you love or respect or want this person to the exclusion of everyone else. And these kind of discussions, and not shying away from whether it's love or respect or long-term, or if you want kids, have them honestly and have the right conversations with yourself and people around you, and especially on the dates you go on, to get exactly what you want. Stop avoiding these things you want the person to be, or you really wish them that they were. You will never know unless you talk about them and you're direct about them with the person. You can avoid them and just rotate people on Tinder till the cows come home or you get bored. Let's get real. After a while, I'm pretty sure many of you just see the same faces on Tinder or on your dating profile, and you get bored and you start playing video games, and you come back and you just see if there's a new face that you can rotate and have fun with. If you're just going to go back to the same Tinder app, I would rather go back to the same person in my life and that be consistent rather than the inconsistency of dating profiles. But that's another subject anyway. Any final thoughts, guys? I've blabbed on enough. Often, Karu?
I think we've pretty well covered it. Great conversation.
Yeah, I knew this conversation wasn't going to get to any specific answers. I really thought this is a kind of conversation that should generate you to come up with your own ethics and values surrounding what you want or who you could trust that might lead to, who you might be able to love. Your thoughts, Karu?
I'm pretty empty-headed right now. I'm sorry. No thoughts.
That's all right. It's I think it's like 6 a.m. for Karu, and Karu's not feeling the best. So thanks for showing up. Yeah, all right, guys. Let me take a look. I don't think there's any. I can actually click on a tab that says Super Chats. No Super Chats I've missed. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. For any of you who have a microphone, jump on Gilded. A few of us jump on. Thanks for showing up. I'll see you in the next video or stream. Thanks to my guests today. And yeah, this was interesting. I'll try and remember to pose a call out for interesting questions in my community tab before the stream so we can get topics like this. Today's topic was actually given to me by Rocket, who usually could hang out with us here in the chat as a live guest, but he has some life things going on. He's touching grass in the real world, which more of us should be doing. So anyway, thanks guys. Thanks everyone. I'll catch you in the next video or stream, and like, subscribe, comment on the channel, and yeah, I'll see the rest of you on Gilded if you have a microphone in the next couple of minutes. All right. Bye, everyone.